It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha, it's Feedback Friday. And Horace, what are you doing on Cthulhu's head back there? Anyway, this Feedback Friday, there were a couple of things that came up, and I think two main things are going to require their own videos. So, and I think that some people will be interested in one, some people will be interested in another, and so I'm going to divide them. One is, and this one is on the education system and how it doesn't really benefit anybody. That's this video. I'm going to do another one on the whole Hogwarts legacy. If you buy it, are you a transphobe thing? But obviously, if you don't want to watch that, I'm not going to make anybody sit through one to watch the other. They're very different things. So if you like this content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Again, we are six people now who need subsidized Leanna Care services. So please help out if you can. So the education system. This was in response to, me pointing out that some statistics show the education system is failing boys. And then other data that show the education system is failing girls. And then others where the education system is failing everybody. And it's what the education system is set up to be designed to do, and the history of it. And the truth is, yes, the education system historically was designed to destroy the willfulness of children, because it was designed to destroy play and learn you to sit still and take orders, because increasingly, as one person put it, it was seen as child's work. Right? Not so much education to create well-rounded people who can solve problems and think critically. No, it was designed to create obedient workers, future soldiers, and good patriots, as the case may be. And that's why I went, about all this gender ideology indoctrinating kids. The education system has always been designed to indoctrinate children in something, primarily being mind-numbing automatons for agriculture and factory, and then religious indoctrination on top of that. And that's why it doesn't serve anyone terribly well. The best education is one with, small class sizes that emphasize an element of play with physical activity, where there is an element of personal exploration, learning at one's own pace, obviously within, measured benchmarks, and actually teaching people how to learn, teaching people how to seek out information on an ongoing basis, and this includes learning cooperation, communication, and independence. That's how you create thinkers. That's how you create leaders. Of course, no, that's not what public education, notably public education, is designed to do. Now, of course, private education pretty much went the same way. And a lot of what goes on in schooling has nothing to do with what we know works, has nothing to do with best practices. It comes down to what politicians want, what is cheapest, and what can be easily and lazily measured by standardized testing. Personally, I think standardized testing is, the way it's done and the way it's used is a terrible thing for education, because, obviously socioeconomics plays a big role. And with the US, it's local tax dollars that, fund the schools. And so school districts with a higher tax base, well, they have more funding. The schools in the neediest areas where education could be a great equalizer, they're underfunded, and so the gulf widens instead of shrinks. Now, some people say, well, what's wrong with that? And that's the problem, right? Some people think that is right and just, instead of it actually being a meritocracy where everybody gets access to the same things. Now, whether people use that for various reasons, you cannot make people consume the good stuff. But it should be available to everybody, and right now it's not. And it all goes back to the system where, the wealthy landowners, things like that, still stuck with private tutors for their little darlings. And so they had that personalized education, that, that hands-on approach, that mentorship that we know works. Public school was indoctrination. It was sit down, shut up, do what you're told, because you were either going to go work in a field somewhere or work in a factory somewhere. And, the bosses don't like people getting uppity. And, we see the results differently in boys than in girls because of the way boys and girls are socialized. But it all comes down to the same thing, right? Boys end up being angry and unable to concentrate because people are trying to crush their wills. And the dropout rate is higher, somewhat higher. Girls, the amount of depression and anxiety being measured in teen girls right now is alarming. Now, I'm always very cautious with statistics, especially regarding these sorts of things, because they're obviously self-reported. And often I think depression and anxiety are undercounted in boys because they're labeled as, anger problems, ADHD, behavior problems instead of anxiety and depression. Whereas girls tend to be undercounted in things like autism spectrum, ADHD, so on and so forth, because girls mask, or as one person taught me the term this week, camouflage better at that age. That doesn't mean guys don't mask in adulthood. It's just, these are generalities. And when you've got classes of 35 kids and one teacher, and they start the year without books or science equipment, there's a problem. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see I'm constantly retweeting clear the list requests from teachers and donors choose requests from teachers, because these are people trying to top up their classroom assets. A lot of them are Title I schools. So, the poorest of the poor, that equalization. Now, I feel very strongly about this stuff because I benefited greatly from teachers who were invested, because I grew up in the Jane Finch neighborhood of Toronto. For those of you who know what that means, you're going, whoa, right now. The Jane Finch neighborhood of Toronto is known as something that is notoriously not great. It is heavily racialized and poor. And so during a certain period, they invested a lot in educational opportunities for kids like me so that they could balance the scales. Now, in the 90s, they cut back a lot of those programs because of an ideologically driven back to basics approach. We're too soft on the kids. We gotta be tough, back to basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, standardized testing. And it squashed all those gains. And that, for whatever reason, spread because people liked the idea of child's work, of education being hard and miserable and stressful instead of something that was more explorational, play-based, and more effective. And we wonder why I am so big on video games as an educational supplement. Now, what they found about research into video games as education is that it obviously, a game does not educate as well as an in-person teacher. And I don't know why they even made this a benchmark because, of course it's not. Somebody who's there and can interact and is a human and can answer questions is obviously going to be superior, assuming it's a good teacher, to a computer. The point is, are there some kids who are better served by alternative methods, like games, because it brings the anxiety down and makes people more receptive to learning? And we do know that certain priming, certain things that increase agitation, make learning harder. And that makes sense, right? A brain under stress doesn't absorb esoterica as well, right? And there's no substitute for good teachers. One of the other things that just doesn't work, and it's an ideological thing, and it makes the parents happy because we're discipline, right, is overwhelming homework. This was something that I believe contributed to some of my current health issues. The amount of homework I got even in high school, it was 4 hours a night some nights. If I was lucky, because the guidelines were an hour a night per subject. And there were 4 subjects for senior students. So a lot of us ended up, dropping a class so that we only had 3 hours and you could use that. This is what I did anyway, that during my spare class, I did homework for my morning classes. And then, or if it was in the morning, I did homework there were just not enough hours in the day to do everything I needed to do and sleep. So I was chronically sleep deprived as a teenager. And we know that what does chronic sleep deprivation do? Affect mood, affect confidence, all this stuff. School, as is, doesn't work for anyone. And it puts people in that beaten down bunker mentality. And so we end up with these culture war fights of people pull this decision. Look, it's bad for boys. And then somebody else, look, it's terrible for girls. Fight. Instead of going, okay, wait a minute. Both these statistics are valid. And that means it's not working for anybody. But there are very few people willing to do that. Because one, it means agreeing to an extent with people who don't share one's comfortable bias. And we all have one, right? We all have one way or the other. Which is why I took a good hard look at the statistics involving boys. Because, I was only aware of how I was treated. So you take a good hard look at the statistics involving boys, but that doesn't invalidate the statistics involving girls. And then you go, oh yeah, but girls are, no, stop. No, you don't need to do that. We can dig deeper. We can look at the underlying factors, but of course, what happens when you go stop, you're both right. Every culture warrior on the planet flips out at you and starts screaming at you about why they have it worse and why all these other compromises have to be made to save whoever, right? And the truth is, we shouldn't be leaving anyone behind. No one should feel like, I shouldn't say no one should feel, because everybody is being trained to feel like they are being neglected and abused and left behind. When the truth is, it's not about who has it worse. It's about the system is damaging different groups of people in different ways, right? I mean, we're going through a period of change right now where we have recognized that if some kid opens up a textbook and it's all white faces and they're not white, we know that has an impact. We know that when women are encouraged to think about their gender, or racialized people are asked to think about race, they perform less well on tests. We know that. That's been replicated. It's a psych out thing. So when they do that and it's like, oh, these are people who look different from me, I'm not included. That has a psychological impact. And so there was this correction. That's great, right? But then there was this psychological reaction for the people who were seeing less of themselves in things, because it's the same. Oh, now they're being made to think about their race and their gender. And so it's making them feel bad and it's throwing them off. But this correction is, one could say then maybe we shouldn't have humans in books at all. But then we know that there are some people who connect better to things with faces. So there's no win. There has to be a correction. There has to be a little bit. And that's why, a sense of belonging is very important and needs to be actively fostered early on. Because if people feel, I work with people every week who did not have that sense of belonging and acceptance, not uncritically, not universally, but generally felt like they belonged and they were accepted, that hounds someone throughout their entire life, causes them to behave in ways that damage them, damage their opportunities, damage their relationships. And it takes a lot of effort to unwind that and replace it with generally a sense of trust in the immediate world around them. And this is what school does. The competitiveness alone, when the reality is in a functioning system, being a B student should be enough. That is a level of competence. You shouldn't need straight A pluses to be able to get additional accreditation after high school. A high school diploma should be enough, frankly, for a lot of jobs that require university. But, public education now is so inconsistent that they want that university education because some people come out of high school not being able to really read. That's more in the US. When my stepfather was still a university administrator, there was an issue of, they knew that students from some provinces were coming in with far lower reading and math skills than people in Ontario or BC. And, there were a bunch of issues, and university ends up having to be remedial high school for some things. That's not a functioning system, and it doesn't have to be that way. But for a lot of different reasons, most of them political, and most of them because adults want to feel comfortable on a gut level. And, because a lot of parents get competitive and they want an edge for their kids. They don't want an equal playing field. They want their kids to have an advantage. And on a human level, you can understand it. But as an educator, that's the opposite of what public schooling as a pillar of a functioning society, and it is up there with, a free and accurate press, a functioning legal system, and free and fair elections. Those are the four pillars of, functional democracy. But there's a lot of people who don't want a functional democracy, right? They want culture war. They want people pitted against each other. They want people indoctrinated to the point that they will burn their friends and family because they are so angry and somebody has pointed them at someone to blame. And they have had these messages repeated at them so much from people that they trust for one reason or another that they don't understand the negative reactions they receive from the people around them because they have been so wrapped in messaging that, first of all, they've been taught not to listen. It's, you've been told this, get the right answer. And I see this so much. I see this with the way people react to the idea of cancel culture. Instead of a Gen Xer like me, who was raised, and I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying it's very, very different. It's unhealthy in its own way. But Gen Xers were basically raised to believe the world doesn't care about you. In fact, it'll fuck you if you can. People aren't going to like you. That's life. Yeah, not everyone's going to go your way. In fact, a lot of things aren't going to go your way. We cut our teeth on wave after wave of really serious recessions because that was before the extended bull market of the 90s, right? That economists ridiculously were saying this can go on forever. And so, yeah, there was cyclical unemployment. There was a whole bunch of stuff. There was the whole last hired, first fired concept. We expected unfairness, and we did not expect anyone to listen to us. In fact, the joke is always Gen X is the generation that gets left off every talk about generations. We somehow jump from boomers to millennials, and gee, there's that 20-year gap in between. And that apathy has meant that, there won't be a Gen X president. We checked out of a lot of systems. Because we were like, yep, you're rejecting us. All right, moving on to the next thing until we find our people and we find our nice little pocket of the world that makes sense to us and treats us well, ideally. People even 5 years younger than me, when the millennial, I am born in 78, so I'm like the late end of Gen X. And millennials have a completely different attitude. They were taught, get good grades, go to school, get a college degree, and that's your ticket. And they took on all this debt accordingly, because just as I, got out of the educational system, rates started skyrocketing for various reasons. Tuitions started going up and up and up. And so people took on all this debt thinking that was the deal. There was a social contract that then society violated when the subprime mortgage bust happened. And that's where we have this culture war coming in. All these people are angry, they are aggrieved, and we know when we get one, the entitlement that comes from these are the rules, play by the rules, you'll win, coupled with aggrievement, and I'm not saying entitlement is a bad thing. It's the idea of entitlements like law. You're entitled to these things. That's what people were taught. And then they're taken away and people are aggrieved. And then various culture war opportunists jumped in there, and, the radical feminists say it's men. The manosphere says it's women. The red pillars say it's Chads and Stacys. The I don't even know what to call it. The culture warriors, I'll just say, of any stripe, it's somebody else, because I don't like using the term critical theory. That's too big. And there's certain elements of critical theory that are totally valid. It's just, there's a bunch of people armchairing theory in ways it doesn't belong and was never intended to be used. And this has meant that everybody is fighting an other. And the reality is everybody's right in terms of the fact that they were promised things that they did not get. The rug was pulled out from under them. but they end up blaming identity groups instead of the system itself. And that is a feature, not a bug of the system. If you study propaganda, it always points the targeted group at an other so that they don't pay attention to who's really pulling their strings. And that's where we are on numerous levels. And that was one of the things that a pluralistic, egalitarian public education system was supposed to buttress against until it didn't. And it never met that ideal is the thing. It just seems to be failing people worse now because the requirements of the world have become so much more complex. And so a one-size-fits-all education isn't serving anybody. Okay? Okay, so if you like this, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. YouTube algorithm is probably not going to like this. So patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for somebody who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.